Hey, how's it going? On this episode of Home Water Dispatch, I've just come back from a 2-week trip where I was in Argentina. And the trip was focused on these guys above my head, Golden Dorado, such an amazing species that lives in the neotropics. I was there helping to facilitate some research, doing some radio tagging to look at movement patterns of Golden Dorado in the Alto Paraná, the upper part of the Paraná River, which borders Argentina and Paraguay. Was there to also help build capacity for a new sort of grassroots conservation movement called the Golden Dorado Conservation Coalition. So there were some amazing presentations to local and regional governments. We had industry folks, we had lodge owners, we had the Navy at these presentations. It was fabulous in terms of building momentum for this unified voice about the conservation of Golden Dorado, for the ecological, economic, and cultural significance that they hold, the goods and services they provide, all that stuff we often talk about when it comes to conservation and advocacy and activism tied to the conservation of nature, right? It was a pretty amazing trip with some wonderful collaborators. And as part of the trip, I had a chance to tour a huge hydroelectric dam upstream of the research site where we're doing a lot of the tagging. Yacyretá Dam, I'm butchering that pronunciation, but it was mind-blowing in terms of the scale of this dam. I've been to Columbia River in the United States. I've seen big hydroelectric dams. I've been to big dam sites in the United States and in other places, and also seen small dams here in New England, whatever. But like nothing prepared me for that visit. And just to put it in perspective, and so my little primer for this episode was from the dam site and looking at this fish elevator that we'll talk about in a second. It was so conflicted being there. The scale was huge, and I also wanted to be very respectful of my collaborators that are doing research in that area. They're monitoring the impacts of the dam. And which is why I'm shooting this fuller episode, this complete episode of Home Water Dispatch in my office now that I'm home. I wanted to be very respectful of the political landscape there. Not that I didn't want to shout and scream about how this 76 kilometer long, longer than my arms, dam is sort of bisecting the Paraná River, and how it's kind of impacting water flow. It's fragmenting the environment. There's a big reservoir upstream and obviously the big river downstream, and that the water flow, the discharge, is predominantly influenced by hydro needs, electricity needs of big cities like Buenos Aires. When there's a demand for the load, when the air conditioners are on in the summertime, loads increase and they let more water out to produce more power. That's how hydroelectric dams kind of work. And, I was reflecting on all that based on the way that Golden Dorado used that stretch of the river. There are some hypotheses that upper stretch of the Paraná is really important for super big Golden Dorado, and as a important spawning location. And some work that's come out of my lab and with collaborators here at UMass and collaborators in South America, there's a sense that there's some really important connectivity that happens in the Paraná River Basin related to gene flow and other things. But when you put a big dam in the way, that gene flow can get curtailed. So, and given that Golden Dorado, these guys are probably keystone species, they're piscivores, they're migratory, there was no before-after study, there was no evidence showing that Golden Dorado moved further upstream. But because they're migratory, and because when we think about putting big dams in locations like this, from a way to mitigate impacts, we try to engineer solutions. And this brings me to this idea of standing over what I saw was a giant, well, not even a very giant, it wasn't much bigger than my office here, a fish elevator that, when the elevator was down at the level of the Paraná River on the downstream side, a door would open, they would let fish, there was a screen that would move fish into the elevator. The elevator would go up to the height of the reservoir, and then it would quite dramatically tip and dump all the fish out and shoot them into the reservoir. We saw 2 tiny little catfish get lifted up and dumped into the reservoir. And it brought me to tears. It was gut-wrenching to see, and there's 4 of those elevators for a 76-kilometer stretch of dam on this massive, massive river. And it just, it really impacted me. And it really impacted the other scientists that were there regionally from the province of Corrientes. It impacted some of the stakeholders that were there who were fighting for the future of Golden Dorado and their conservation. It was even more gut-wrenching is continues to be the right word than I expected it to be. I mean, driving up to the dam, I've seen dams before, and so where I'm going with this is this idea of how, as humans, we try to engineer solutions when we're creating these big, large impacts on the landscape, and yet I'm conflicted because, when the dam was instated, obviously, maybe it was probably pre-renewable energy, solar power, wind, and things like that. There's lots of water in these big river systems. There was a lot of advocacy. I think a lot of the funding came from the World Bank to promote this as a green solution for power production. And as we have learned, sort of case study over case study over case study, that for big river systems, it's not only just the migratory species, it's the flow of energy and matter downstream to deltas. We repeat the story over and over again. I think that I'm certainly, it's not that I have had a quiet voice for a while about the impacts of dams, but this is really helping me raise my voice a little bit more in thinking about trying to prevent future dams like this going in very sensitive biodiverse ecosystems like where we were in the neotropics, and how we can use science and an evidence-based approach to advocate for different solutions for power production, not big hydroelectric dams like this one that done like incredible amount of damage and that were cost billions of dollars. I think there are different ways that we can satisfy the needs of human societies without doing probably the amount of environmental damage that this dam has done. And it's not like, I know there's lots of, big campaigns for removing dams in North America and around the world. And as I was looking at this dam, I was asking myself, how do we even start with something that is that big? And that's where my lens shifts to continuing to use science and advocacy and fire up stakeholders and supporting this grassroots conservation movement to prevent future dams, to raise more awareness about the importance of species like Golden Dorado that can act maybe as like an umbrella species for the protection of the watershed, for the protection of going back in full circle to the economic and ecological and cultural goods and services, and the reputation that this critter has in terms of such an amazing species, not only for people to fish, but we were going into old hotels where there was definitely a big connection to Golden Dorado as a culturally significant species on that landscape. And so I'm going to go back. The research is going to go on for multiple years. I'm sure to see the dam again, and I'm sure to network with more and more stakeholders that want to fight for the future of their home waters. Those are somebody else's home waters, not mine. But hopefully I can do what I can to lend my voice and also build capacity in terms of science and education in the region to make sure that we as humans proceed with caution as we are doing things to the environment that have such a potentially catastrophic impact on not only nature, but also humans ourselves. I think the downstream effects, pardon the pun, but the downstream effects of putting a big dam like that are just, we have to be extremely careful. So I'm going to stop there. I know this has been a long one, tons to unpack, but humans, we got to be more careful. All right, until next time, see you later on Home Water Dispatch. Bye.